Now, the majority of officials inside the Democratic Party establishment continue to push radical centrism as a way to win elections. Of course, radical centrism being let's continuously chase the right wing in a vain appearance to appear centrist. Now, they will point to wins by people, for example, like Doug Jones and Connor Lamb, as a way to rebuff the progressive wing of the party and say, no, 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 no. You don't understand. We have to run to the center. Look at all these victories we got by running to the center. Yeah, but they ignore all the progressive victories that we've also had in this election cycle. Places where Donald Trump won by sometimes double-digit margins, where a progressive picked up that seat. But let's ignore all those, right? But they do. They say, no, no, you don't understand. Most Americans, see, your guys are fringe, you progressives. Most America is in the center. They're in the middle. So we can't go too far left like that crazy Bernie Sanders guy and all the other people that have adopted these crazy leftist positions. I mean, look, Medicare for all, that is too pie in the sky. No, no, we're capitalists, and that's the way it is. Now, I'm going to show you that on progressive priorities, that could not be more wrong. In collaboration with Justice Democrats, according to an article in Vice, Data for Progress has released a new report making the case for a progressive Democratic Party. It is called Future of the Party Report. Now, Vice writes, at the heart of our analysis is a novel crossing of public opinion research with analysis of actual roll call voting. The result is stark. On issues from racial justice to economic equality, Democratic primary voters are increasingly united around progressive policies, and those who represent them or aspire to would do well to act and vote accordingly. Now, unfortunately, we have a system of legalized bribery that prevents a lot of these politicians from doing so. Now, they continue. We analyzed the preferences of the Democratic base, finding increasing support of progressive politics rather than centrism. So immediately, they're like, okay, well, let's see. Are Democratic voters more centrist? And therefore, the politicians do represent them in their centrism? Or are they more progressive and their politicians don't represent them? Again, they found out that it is the latter, that they're massively progressive, and yet the congressmen do not reflect that value. Now, let me give one example here. The recent bank deregulation bill. I've talked about that. It was supported by Joe Manchin, Heidi Heitkamp, and, of course, Doug Jones of Alabama. Now, the Democratic base, how do they feel about bank deregulation? Well, it turns out the base wants more regulation on the banks, as well as additional action to take on income and wealth inequality. According to the 2016 American Voter Election Study, 92% of Democratic primary voters support more government regulation of the banks. 80% say the government should reduce inequality, and 86% say the government should guarantee health care. I didn't hear the word access in there, because that's the buzzword that all these so-called new progressive politicians are saying. Oh, no, we want to guarantee access to health care. You know what that means? That means staying in the for-profit system. Oh, no, we just want to guarantee that you have access to the health care. No. We want to hear you're going to guarantee health care, because that is what 86% of the American people, or not of the American people, sorry, of Democratic voters want. 60% of the American people want single-payer health care. Now, again, that's why Medicare for all has such big popularity, not just among Democrats, but among the American people, as I just mentioned. However, centrists, you hear from them all the time saying, oh, no, we can't do that. That's pie in the sky. That's too far left. No, it's too radical. I remember Hillary Clinton saying back in 2016 that single-payer health care will never, ever come to pass. Oh, I'm sure she's eating those words now. And you wonder why she wasn't 50 points ahead of Donald Trump. Now, of course, whenever progressives want to point out, hey, look, we have great policy. Our policies will help all Americans. Centrists tend to say, well, you guys are white Bernie bros. Bernie Sanders, that's terrible African-American voters. No, that's a continuous smear that is left over from 2016 that continues to get spread, that Bernie Sanders does terrible among African-American voters, and that all progressives are just white Bernie bros that aren't representative of the minority communities. Because minority communities, African-Americans especially, well, they go for centrists. They're pragmatic. They're practical, which basically means centrist, milquetoast, and pro-corporate, which they're not. No. Democratic primary voters, especially progressives, are far to the left on racial justice and economic inequality, as I mentioned. Now, that includes a majority of progressives wanting to end private prisons. That is something that we're running on. How about ending mandatory sentences? That's also something that most progressives are on board. And ending the war on drugs in legalizing drugs. That is also something most American progressives are in favor of. Now, polling on these issues shows massive support among voters. Now, the thing is that the politicians, as I mentioned before, do not match up what the voters want. 76% of Democratic senators, for example, represent states where modeled support for a $15 minimum wage is greater than 55%. However, only 61% of those senators support a $15 minimum wage. Why is that not 100%? It should be. It should be. Now, how about Medicare for all? 67% of Democrats in the Senate represent states where modeled support for Medicare for all is greater than 55%. However, only 1/3 of Senate Democrats support Medicare for all. That's 33%. That is amazing, right? But no, you have all these politicians that are getting paid off by pharmaceutical companies, which is by far the largest donors to Congress on both sides, and of course, health insurance companies. Not only that, but despite the fact that 86% of Democratic senators represent states with 55% support for repealing the Hyde Amendment. So this is women's rights. There are no senators out there that have tried to move forward with a bill to repeal the Hyde Amendment. And again, the Hyde Amendment says that you cannot have any federal money that goes to funding abortions. Again, Republicans, conservatives will claim, oh, look at all this money from the government going to fund abortions. Planned Parenthood killing babies with our tax money. No, that's not true. That's not true. That's actually not what's happening. And there are no Democratic senators. They are so afraid of the pro-life movement that no senators have put forward any legislation to repeal the Hyde Amendment, despite 86% of Democratic senators representing states where that is majority support among Democratic voters. And then finally, this is the worst part. Despite the fact that every Democratic senator represents a state where support for regulating CO2 is 55% or greater. So every state where a Democratic senator is representing, you have a solid majority of voters that are like, let's do something about regulating CO2. We got to do something about climate change. Come on, we got to do something about climate change. Only 5 senators support transitioning to renewable energy by 2050. That's not an ambitious plan. That's a plan that we should already have in place. And you know what? You wonder why that is. You look at those numbers and they're stark, right? Well, it could be because our representatives no longer represent us anymore. It could be the fact that they represent their donors and not the people who elect them. I think we all know that that's exactly what's going on. That's why we actually need to replace these Democrats with uncorrupted progressives. And then those uncorrupted progressives can get money out of politics, uncorrupt the process, and not just be uncorrupted themselves, but defuck the process. Because right now, the system of money in politics is absolutely fucked. And can you imagine if that ever happens? And it will happen. We could have things like Medicare for all. We could have a living wage. We could have free education at public colleges. We could transition to a green energy environment. We could get rid of private prisons. We could have economic justice. We can have social justice. We can have racial justice. Look, the country, and especially Democratic voters, are ready for something other than the status quo. All you have to do is you have to get involved. You have to vote. And most importantly, you've got to vote in the primaries. Primaries are the most important elections that you can have, because then you can decide what your party actually represents. Get involved and vote. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.